Hello everyone, here we are. We're going to talk about Hezekiah tonight. So let's get going with 2 Chronicles chapter 29. Hezekiah was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 29 years. His mother's name was Abijah, daughter of Zechariah. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father David had done. Remember, David is the father over all of them. In the first month of the year of his reign, very first month, he opened the doors of the temple of the Lord and repaired them. He brought in the priests. Now you remember one of the past kings recently had shut up the temple and put an altar on every street corner to the Baals. Okay, so Hezekiah now is opening it back up. He brought in the priests and the Levites, assembled them in the square on the, on the east side, and said, "Listen to me, Levites. Consecrate yourselves now and consecrate the temple of the Lord, the God of your ancestors. Remove all defilement from the sanctuary. Our parents were unfaithful. They did evil in the eyes of the Lord, our God, and forsook him. They turned their faces away from the Lord's dwelling place and turned their backs on him. They also shut the doors of the portico and put out the lamps. They didn't burn incense or present any burnt offerings at the sanctuary to the God of Israel. Therefore, the anger of the Lord has fallen on Judah and Jerusalem. He's made them an object of dread and horror and scorn, as you can see with your own eyes. This is why our fathers have fallen by the sword and why our sons and daughters and our wives are in captivity." You know, this reminds me of today, okay? Because we have not honored the Lord, because we are a very wayward civilization at this point, our wives and our children are in captivity, okay? Look at how lascivious women are today. Look at our children, how they're out there with no consciences. That's captivity, okay? Now, I intend to make a covenant with the Lord, the God of Israel, so that his fierce anger will turn away from us. My sons, do not be negligent now, for the Lord's chosen you to stand before him and serve him, to minister before him and to burn incense. Then these Levites set to work from the Kohathites, Mahath, son of Amasai, and Joel, son of Azariah. From the Merarites, Kish, son of Abdi, and Azariah, son of Jaheliel. From the Gershonites, Joah, son of Zimmah, and Eden, son of Joah. Okay, Joah, son of Zimmah, and Eden, son of Joah. From the descendants of Elizaphan, Shimri, and Jael. From the descendants of Asaph, Zechariah and Mattaniah. From the descendants of Heman, Jehiel and Shimel. From the descendants of Jeduthun, Shemaiah and Uzziel. We've heard these names before. We're familiar with them. When they had assembled their fellow Levites and consecrated themselves, they went to purify the temple of the Lord as the king had ordered, following the word of the Lord. The priests went into the sanctuary of the Lord to purify it. They brought out to the courtyard of the Lord's temple everything unclean that they found in the temple of the Lord. The Levites took it and carried it out to the Kidron Valley. They began the consecration on the first day of the first month, and by the 8th day of the month, they reached the portico of the Lord. For 8 more days, they consecrated the temple of the Lord itself, finishing on the 16th day of the first month. So it took them about 2 weeks to do it. Then they went, remember we still have problems with my sinuses. Then they went to King Hezekiah and reported, excuse me, we have purified the entire temple of the Lord, the altar of burnt offering with its utensils, and the table for setting out the consecrated bread with all its articles. We have prepared and consecrated all the articles that King Ahaz removed in his unfaithfulness while he was king. They are now in front of the Lord's altar. Early the next morning, King Hezekiah gathered the city officials together and went up to the temple of the Lord. They brought 7 bulls, 7 rams, 7 male lambs, and 7 male goats as a sin offering. I don't know if you remember that, but that's what they were asked to bring for a sin offering back in the first 5 books that we read in the Old Testament. For the kingdom, male goats as a sin offering for the kingdom, for the sanctuary, and for Judah. The king commanded the priests, the descendants of Aaron, to offer these on the altar of the Lord. So they slaughtered the bulls, and the priests took the blood and splashed it against the altar. Next, they slaughtered the rams and splashed their blood against the altar. Then they slaughtered the lambs and splashed their blood. Did I say rams? Oh, rams. And then they slaughtered the lambs and splashed their blood against the altar. The goats for the sin offering were brought before the king and the assembly, and they laid their hands on them. The priests then slaughtered the goats and presented their blood on the altar for a sin offering to atone for all of Israel, because the king had ordered the burnt offering and the sin offering for all of Israel. He stationed the Levites in the temple of the Lord with cymbals, harps, and lyres in the way prescribed by David and Gad, the king's seer, and Nathan the prophet. This was commanded by the Lord through his prophets. So the Levites stood ready with David's instruments and the priests with their trumpets. Hezekiah gave the order to sacrifice the burnt offering on the altar. As the offering began, singing to the Lord began also, accompanied by trumpets and the instruments of David, king of Israel. The whole assembly bowed in worship while the musicians played and the trumpets sounded. All this continued until the sacrifice of the burnt offering was completed. Excuse me. Let me get another little horn honk from me. When the offerings were finished, that was my trumpet, that was my contribution. When the offerings were finished, the king and everyone present with him knelt down and worshiped. King Hezekiah and his officials ordered the Levites to praise the Lord with the words of David and of Asaph, the seer. So they sang praises with gladness and bowed down and worshiped. I didn't know Asaph was a seer, because he's really important when it comes to Psalms, when it comes to the music. Then Hezekiah said, "You've now dedicated yourselves to the Lord. Come and bring sacrifices and thank offerings to the temple of the Lord." So the assembly brought sacrifices and thank offerings, and all whose hearts were willing brought burnt offerings. The number of burnt offerings the assembly brought was 70 bulls, 100 rams, and 200 male lambs, all of them for burnt offerings to the Lord. The animals consecrated as sacrifices amounted to 600 bulls and 3,000 sheep and goats. The priests, however, were too few to skin all the burnt offerings, so their relatives, the Levites, helped them until the task was finished and until other priests had been consecrated. For the Levites had been more conscientious in consecrating themselves than the priests had been. There were burnt offerings in abundance, together with the fat of the fellowship offerings and the drink offerings that accompanied the burnt offerings. So the service of the temple of the Lord was reestablished. Hezekiah and all the people rejoiced at what God had brought about for his people, because it was done so quickly. Hezekiah sent word to all Israel and Judah, and also wrote letters to Ephraim and Manasseh, inviting them to come to the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem and celebrate the Passover to the Lord, the God of Israel. The king and his officials and the whole assembly in Jerusalem decided to celebrate the Passover in the 2nd month. They had not been able to celebrate it at the regular time because not enough priests had been consecrated themselves, and the people had not assembled in Jerusalem. The plan seemed right both to the king and to the whole assembly. They decided to send a proclamation throughout Israel from Beersheba to Dan, calling the people to come to Jerusalem and celebrate the Passover to the Lord, the God of Israel. It had not been celebrated in large numbers according to what was written. At the king's command, couriers went throughout Israel and Judah with letters from the king and from his officials, which read, "People of Israel, return to the Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel," which is Jacob, "that he may return to you who are left, who have escaped from the hand of the kings of Assyria. Do not be like your parents and your fellow Israelites," not Judah, but Israel, "who were unfaithful to the Lord, the God of their ancestors, so that he made them an object of horror, as you see. Do not be stiff-necked as your ancestors were. Submit to the Lord. Come to his sanctuary, which he's consecrated forever. Serve the Lord your God, so that his fierce anger will turn away from you. If you return to the Lord, then your fellow Israelites and your children will be shown compassion by their captors and will return to this land. For the Lord your God is gracious and compassionate." Boy, is he, people. "He will not turn his face from you if you return to him." The couriers went from town to town in Ephraim and Manasseh as far as Zebulun, but people scorned and ridiculed them. Nevertheless, some from Asher, Manasseh, and Zebulun humbled themselves and went to Jerusalem. Very wise. Also in Judah, the hand of God was on the people to give them unity of mind to carry out what the king and his officials had ordered, following the word of the Lord. So they went into Israel, which is not Judah. Remember, there's a separation. Some of the people in Israel came. Now, all of Judah was of this mind, and they were all ready to go to this Passover, okay? So now we see some peoples from Israel, from that side of the Israelites, trickling in to join them. A very large crowd of people assembled in Jerusalem to celebrate the festival of unleavened bread in the second month. They removed the altars in Jerusalem and cleared away the incense altars and threw them into the Kidron Valley. Now, what I understand about the Kidron Valley, I believe Ben Hinnom, excuse me, is part of that. I could be wrong, but I seem to remember the Valley of Hinnom, Hinnomon. It's not Hinnom, Anyway, it's a garbage dump. It's where they dump all their garbage, okay? So that's the point that I want to make to you here. They removed the altars in Jerusalem, cleared away the incense altars, and threw them into the Kidron Valley. They slaughtered the Passover lamb on the 14th day of the second month. The priests and the Levites were ashamed and consecrated themselves and brought burnt offerings to the temple of the Lord. Then they took up their regular positions as prescribed in the law of Moses, the man of God. That would be within the first 5 books. The priests splashed against the altar the blood handed to them by the Levites. Since many in the crowd had not consecrated themselves, the Levites had to kill the Passover lambs for all those who were not ceremonially clean and could not consecrate their lambs to the Lord. Although most of the many people who came from Ephraim, Manasseh, Issachar, and Zebulun had not purified themselves, yet they ate the Passover contrary to what was written. But Hezekiah prayed for them, saying, "May the Lord who is good pardon everyone who sets their heart on seeking God, the Lord, the God of their ancestors." So if you can imagine, this is like a celebration, okay? And some people just aren't getting a Passover lamb for slaughter so they can be consecrated, but everybody's joining in. This is a new thing now, okay? They've gotten rid of all of the altars and all of the unclean things, and now they're all joining together. So there's a measure of grace that Hezekiah is asking the Lord for, which we are sure the Lord is to give them because they're all coming back to him. The Lord, the God of their ancestors, even if they're not clean according to the rules of the sanctuary. That was Hezekiah's prayer. And the Lord heard Hezekiah and healed the people. The Israelites who were present in Jerusalem celebrated the festival of unleavened bread for 7 days with great rejoicing. So this was a big party, while the Levites and priests praised the Lord every day with resounding instruments dedicated to the Lord. So there was music at this party too. There was music and there was praise and worship. There was food. Hezekiah spoke encouragingly to all the Levites who showed good understanding of the service of the Lord. So they were doing their duties very, very well. For the 7 days, they ate their assigned portion and offered fellowship offerings and praised the Lord, the God of their ancestors. So they had an assigned portion of the offerings that they could eat. If you remember, I believe it was the shoulder, or one of the breasts or something of the bulls and the rams and everything that was offered. And then they were doing the fellowship offerings for the people, okay? All right, so the whole assembly then agreed to celebrate the festival 7 more days. So for another 7 days, they celebrated joyfully. Hezekiah, king of Judah, provided 1,000 bulls and 7,000 sheep and goats for the assembly. And the officials provided them with 1,000 bulls and 10,000 sheep and goats. A great number of priests consecrated themselves. The entire assembly of Judah rejoiced along with the priests and Levites, all who had assembled from Israel, including the foreigners who had come from Israel, and also those who resided in Judah. There was great joy in Jerusalem, for since the days of Solomon, son of King David of Israel, there had been nothing like this in Jerusalem. The priests and the Levites stood to bless the people, and God heard them, for their prayer reached heaven, his holy dwelling place. And I'm going to leave you with that, the big party, okay? I love you guys very much. You hang in there and don't worry about things that are going on in the world. Just, you know, I heard a great preaching by Pastor Wayne Taylor today, and I have it up on my site. And he said, you know, just don't worry about these leaders and the things that they think are important. The important thing is God Almighty. So I love you, and you have a wonderful evening, and I'll see you tomorrow. We'll pick it up at 2 Chronicles 31. Love you. Bye-bye.